Okay, we can go ahead and start.
Okay. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 p.m. and I would like to call the January 13th, 2022 regular school closure / consolidation committee meeting number 5 of the Inglewood Unified School District to order. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with Assembly Bill 361, which amends the Raphael Brown Act to allow local governments to continue conducting virtual meetings. Moving on to item 1B, Ms. Torres, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Ms. Tiara Johnson. Ms. Tamara Thompson.
I'm present.
Present. Okay, thank you. Ms. Vanessa Davenport.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Miguel Perez.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Dexter Hull.
Present.
Ms. Sylvia Lutson Selby.
Present.
And Mr. Wesley Newman.
Present. Thank you, Ms. Torres. Moving on to item 2, Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to ask Mr. Miguel Perez to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
My pleasure. Would everybody please stand? Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America
and to the
republic
for which it
stands,
one
nation,
under
God,
indivisible, with
liberty and justice
for
for
all.
all.
Please be seated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Moving on to item 3, public comments. Persons wishing to make comments to the committee on agendized and non-agendized items may do so at this time. Each speaker is requested to limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes. Ms. Torres, do we have any public comments on agenda or non-agendized items?
No, we do not have any public comments.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Torres. Next on the agenda is item 4. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 16th, 2021 meeting?
I motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Do we have a second?
I second.
Ms. Selby. Thank you, Ms. Selby. So on the motion made by Mr. Hall. And
let me, I'm sorry, Mr. Newman. Let me just do the roll call. Sorry.
Yeah, my bad.
Oh, sorry. Ms. Tiara Johnson. Ms. Tamara Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Vanessa Davenport.
Yes.
Mr. Miguel Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Dexter Hull.
Yes.
Ms. Sylvia Lutson Selby.
Yes.
And Mr. Wesley Newman.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I can proceed.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So we have a motion by Mr. Hall and second by Ms. Selby. Well, you already took the vote. So the vote carries to approve the minutes of the December 16th meeting. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, presentations. I would like to ask Mr. Rafael Guzman to please introduce the presenters.
Thank you, Mr. Newman, and welcome to our School Closure Consolidation Committee and any members of the public that are present today. Thank you so much regarding your presence here. And so in one of the requests of the School Closure and Consolidation Committee was to get some more specific recommendations in our previous meeting, as well as just some questions regarding educationally related opportunities. And so we are going to be having 2 presentations today. The first one is going to be from Total School Solutions, and we have Dr. Joseph Pandolfo here. who is going to present to us today. And he, again, is from Total School Solutions. So, Mr. Pandolfo, thank you. You may begin your presentation.
All right, thank you. I'll start by sharing my screen, and then I'll introduce myself. So let me push the button here. Okay, so you should be able to see our PowerPoint, correct? Okay, so my name is Joseph Pandolfo, and I am the Executive Vice President with Total School Solutions. So we're a little bit about us. We're a full-service school consulting firm. We've been in existence since 1999. As our name implies, we try to find solutions for school districts. And my particular background is I have a doctorate from UC Davis, and my dissertation was a school district efficiency. So things like this, which are school consolidation closures, are very difficult for districts. But it's in our wheelhouse of expertise to try to help districts make these decisions. So we're here today to go ahead and excuse me one second. We're here to try to assist the committee in making a recommendation. So we were invited in by the district to take a look and analyze some existing data for the purpose of determining which particular elementary schools are likely candidates for consolidation and closure. So as everyone on this committee knows, this is, and you should be commended for being on this committee and sacrificing your time. These are, anytime you get into a situation with school districts where you're looking at some type of consolidation or closure, those are difficult decisions. So hopefully we're going to shed some light and try to help guide you to make some wise choices. We're going to provide a list and order of specific schools for consideration for closure, so that and previously you were presented with some ideas about closing schools in regions, and with this presentation will be the next step and give some specific recommendations in terms of what schools we think at this point should be targeted. We looked at this, the demographic report previously provided broke the district up into regions. So we were asked to look at those regions and be mindful as we were making these recommendations at the Northwest East region for the elementary schools, and to look at the schools by those types of regions. We're going to, as I mentioned before, we're going to make recommendations to your committee for consideration, and also provide a timeline to move forward with current and future school consolidations and closures. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have some a little more concrete idea of some things that we recommend happen to help the district along. So in terms of how did we exactly do this? Well, we took a look and cross-referenced data. You could say we synthesized data. In other words, we looked at different data points and put them together to try to come up with a conclusion. One of the main ones was the demographic data from Davis Demographics, who did a very thorough job with developing some demographic information for the district, especially in terms of resident enrollment changes over time. And as the committee is well aware that those reports show the district declining hundreds and hundreds of students over the next 7-8 years. We also took, that was one big data point we took a look at. We took a look at the facility data from the Little Diversified Architectural Consulting Facility Condition presentation, which was given to this committee, and I believe it was either December, November, one of those dates, but it was fairly recent. We took a look at that because when you look at school closure consolidation, the facilities play a big part into that. We also took a look at the district geographic information because the geographic information is another key data point, and we'll get into that later, but it does make a difference where the school is located as to what the recommendation is to move forward with any type of closure. And we looked at recent facility modernization that was stated on the district website. And the reason we did that is typically school districts don't want to make a big capital investment in a facility and then end up shutting it soon afterwards. Generally, when the district commits to doing a large-scale modernization of a site, the intent is to keep that school open. Sometimes that's not always possible, but we wanted to be mindful of the district investment it's made in its facilities. And then using this above data, we're going to determine which schools are logical candidates for consolidation closure, and then we're also going to give you some. We'll review the logic and the pros and cons of why we think that, and why we're making those recommendations. So specifically, when we look at what we're considering when we're working through our methodology, is we look at enrollment. So first off, is there sufficient enrollment at a school site to reasonably operate that school? So generally speaking, if the enrollment gets too small at a school site, it causes a lot of problems, and both academic and financial. So that's one of the things we look at is, do we feel like that the school site has a reasonable enrollment to really operate? Does the school enrollment allow for robust academic programs? So when the schools start getting too small, what happens is you end up with a lot of combination classes. There's a lack of staff. Sometimes there's inefficiency because certain there's a certain staff required to run a school site, and that efficiency is lost if the enrollment goes down. So that's another thing we look at. And the other thing is, we're trying to make the least impact to the families as possible, to the least amount of families as possible. Because when you're closing a school, of course, is a major event, and it is going to disrupt the school affected. So you want to try to minimize that disruption as much as possible by finding schools that have the least amount of, that's going to be least disruptive to the families. In terms of the facilities, one of the things we look at, are there any facilities whose physical condition are so poor that they should just be closed on that basis? With Inglewood, that is not what we heard. We hear that the facilities are all in reasonable or better condition, and that we don't really need to worry about that. But that's one of the things we look at. If a school is consolidated or closed, do the remaining students in the region have enough capacity to displace students? So we were asked again to look at schools by region, and so we wanted to make sure if there was a school closed in the region, was there a reasonable capacity in the rest of the schools to absorb that if they all stayed in the region? Now, saying that, we know that there's open enrollment in Inglewood, so they don't necessarily need to stay in the region. Likely they wouldn't all stay in the region, but that's one of the things we looked at. Has there been recent major facility upgrades to school? I touched upon that before when we're looking at the facilities. We also looked at how much money can be saved by closing a school in terms of future modernization money, because in Little's plan, there was an amount estimated for future modernization work. So we took a look at that to see, what type of savings that might be for, if the school was closed and district would not have to make the capital outlay for modernization. And finally, geographic. The schools located in relatively close proximity to the school being closed? In other words, are there schools close by that doesn't create an unreasonable hardship for the students and the families to move from one school to another? That's a consideration, because we're trying to be sensitive to the families, and any change, try to make that as reasonable as possible for the families. Do the contiguous schools being closed have enough capacity to absorb, whether they're in or outside the region? Does it look reasonable if, because sometimes the school may be outside the region but closer to the school that's being closed? If that's the case, is there room to absorb students? So that's another thing we look at. And again, the capacity of the schools in the region, is there enough to absorb? So, and some of these considerations do have some overlap, in terms of geography and facilities. So if we looked at the Davis demographic report, the district was broken up into 3 regions: a north, a west, and an east. And you can see the schools listed there. There's 4 schools in each region. There were, with a little asterisk by La Tijera, because since that's a district-sponsored charter school, it wasn't really fully part of the study. But it is a 4th school in that region. So it's listed here, but it was asterisk just because it's not a true district school in the sense that it's a district charter school. So that just needs to be noted, because that does complicate the process a little bit when we look forward, because the La Tijera has no boundaries. It's not a boundary charter school. So when the demographer looked at what the enrollment is by boundary, since La Tijera doesn't have boundaries, that really wasn't possible. So when all was said and done, when Davis Demographics recommended school closures, they reckoned no more than 2 in the north, one in the west, and 2 schools in the east. So that was when they got done with the recommendation, they set a limit to how many school should be closed, and the limit was 5, and they listed it by regions, 2, 1, and 2 from the Northwest and East. So this chart starts putting together some information that are found in the Davis demographics data plus the facility data. So we have our schools listed in this area here, and then you can see the capacity of the school. Centinela is the biggest in the region with over 1,000 capacity. Parent has about 928, Highland 920. Again, La Tejera was not really quite, wasn't fully part of the study, so it's just blanked out for this purpose. And you can see the school year 22 enrollment is listed there. So all those schools have a lot of capacity for their current enrollment. They could all house, certainly house more students. And then if you look forward, you can see that what their enrollment is moving forward. Now in this region, all the schools are down. What's a little surprising about this too, I mean, I guess it's not really surprising, but what's noteworthy, shall we say, is that when Davis Demographics did their work, they also took into account the change for the transitional kindergarten. So right now, the district's only required to educate about 25% of that transitional kindergarten. So over the next few years, it's all those transitional kindergartens, theirs will be picked up. So all the 4-year-olds will be picked up, and so that's basically adding 3/4 of a grade level, because right now you have 1/4 of the TK. So even with that, the school district and the schools are declining in enrollment. So that's noteworthy. That's pretty significant, because these are the elementary schools that would be housing the TK students. The year built is listed in the next column. This district is a lot like many California school districts that we see. Somewhere between the 40s and 60s, there was a lot of construction. So that's not a surprise that some of these schools are a little older by today's date, but that's if they're well maintained, that's not necessarily a negative thing. And then you can see on the right column, we have the modernization costs for each one of those schools, and what it would take for to really modernize the facility and get it upgraded. And those, of course, I think with the facility costs, we all have to keep in mind, we need to take it with a grain of salt, because I think everyone who's involved with school construction projects understand until you actually get into the project and start getting specific, specifications, it's really hard to estimate the amount. So I'm sure Little did a fine job with this, but it is a rough idea. And of course, we have construction inflation happening quite significantly. So it would not be a surprise that all these numbers could end up being low. So then we move over to the West region, and you can see there that's the same idea. There's the capacities of the school on the left. There's a total enrollment in the next column. And then you can see the projected enrollment. Now, this is, by the way, when I'm talking about projected enrollment, I'm not talking about the enrollment of students living in that school district's boundaries. I'm talking about the total enrollment, everyone who's in the school, transfers and everyone, and what it's projected to look like in the following years. You can see Bula Payne actually has a slight increase. It's and all that's good. It's actually statistically immaterial, 630 to 634. And that's just a projection. It may not even happen. So it's good that they're not dropping, but I wouldn't say that's exactly robust growth either. And then you can kind of go through the other scenarios, like even Kelso is another school district that very slight growth. So whether that pans out, in the future or not, we'll see. The other two are declining. And then again, the years the schools are built, you can see that again, the oldest being Kelso, and then the rest in the 40s and 50s. And then the modernization costs in this region are a little bit less than what we saw in the other. And then in the East region, we have these 4 schools, and you can see again capacity. You can see, like on this one, it's interesting that Woodworth Monroe is actually a very large campus compared to most of the other elementary campuses in the district. You can take a look at the total enrollment for for the current year for these schools. We can look at the projected enrollment. You can see, this region over the next couple of years, even with the TK, is still projected to move downward in terms of total enrollment. The schools here, some of them are a little bit newer, maybe 40s, 50s, the oldest one in the 30s. Then you can see the construction modernization costs on the right-hand side. So this is, and this map, by the way, is provided by Davis Demographics, and I was asked to go ahead and present this as part of this presentation too. So we appreciate Davis Demographics getting us this map. So this is the district and the boundaries, and they're all colored boundaries. So you can see, where the schools are and what their borders are, and you can see that the geography of the district, does make a difference. You can take a look at the northwest side of the district and see that, Frank D. Parent Elementary School boundaries do jut out a bit. The district, Oak Street is another one that's a little bit further out there. Warren Lane does have a corner that is a little bit more removed from other schools. And then you have Benecue kind of in the southernmost part of the district that's a little bit more isolated too. So this is a good thing to keep in mind as we're looking at some of these schools. So other considerations that we're looking at as we go through this are the modernization projects, and that in terms of what's already occurred. So that wasn't on the previous slide. What the previous slide is how much modernization money is estimated to be needed to get the building more current. This is what already has happened. So you can see the list on the left are schools that the district has already made some capital investment in. Some of it's substantial, some not that substantial, but according to the district's website, some of the bond money has been used to modernize these facilities. So that's what we take that into consideration. We're looking to study. It's not the sole thing we're looking at, but we do want to be aware of that. And then in terms of the map we saw that Parent and Oak Street, Benecue and Warren Lane all have kind of sections that are a little bit on the fringe, of the district, especially for Parent. So it's something that we're also mindful as we're working through all the data that we've looked at. So when it comes down to taking all this data and looking at it and coming up with some concrete recommendations for closure, the recommendation was up to 5. And at this point in time, with the data points we see, we're comfortable with recommending 2. And that would be Warren Lane and Worthington. And so we do believe there's room for further closure, and the district needs to explore that. We just don't think right at this moment in time there's enough data, and that some of the concepts that staff may want to work through in terms of how the district is configured have been fully thought through to really recommend more than this. But we think at this point these 2 are candidates, and you can see basically this chart was pulled from or this table was pulled from the East region. It's just a subset of these schools here. So if we look at Warren Lane, what we're seeing is that there's an enrollment of 143. We rarely see a school with that type of an enrollment in a suburban urban area. It's really difficult to operate a school. It's the smallest school in the district. It's also the smallest one in that region. It's not reasonably viable, in our opinion. It's not reasonably viable to continue operating efficiently with 143 students. It lends itself, when you have enrollments that low, you end up with combination classes. It affects the quality of the program for the staffing because there's less staff there. There's less that you can tend to offer with the students. It's not economically efficient. As we all know, the district has struggled financially, and it's difficult to have schools in a district that aren't economically efficient. In terms of savings, the district would save about 9.8 in modernization costs that are part of the Little plan. And also the geography on the site actually works out pretty well because although there is a little bit of the district, the northeast edge of the district, it's not unreasonable for students to be reassigned to, we think, either Woodworth or Kelso. Kelso is outside that region, but that would be those would be some reasonable options to do. And also being the smallest school in the district, it impacts the fewest families, which is another one of our criteria. So that district this school seemed a very viable candidate to recommend for closure. The other one is Worthington. It's another one of the smaller elementary schools in the district. It's the second smallest in the region, third in the whole district. And it's the same kind of concept. When you have small enrollment, it lends itself to combination classes and other staffing issues that can affect the quality of the programs. Again, it's not economically efficient to run this, and the district does need to be aware of trying to pick up some savings. The facility savings would be 11.3 million in modernization costs. That could be, and when the money is saved from an existing site, it can be reinvested in one of the other sites to really help make those sites more special for the students who are there. So that's a big deal, because bond money isn't infinite either, and it's good to be able to use it wisely for the biggest impact for the buck. And then it's also situated between Woodworth, Monroe, and Bennett Q. So it's relatively easy to reallocate students to one of those two sites that both have capacity to be able to do that. The other recommendation we had was not part of the Davis demographic study and not the Little presentation, but some basically anecdotal conversation with staff. We feel like the Inglewood Continuation High School could be the continuation high school typically rolls about 90. It varies every year. I think some years it was in the 70s, some years in the higher 90s, but it's around 90. Currently, the school is on a different campus than other high schools, which is not that atypical for a continuation school. But there looks to be an opportunity to move this and pick up some efficiency by moving to the Inglewood High campus, which could save some costs for both administration and some operational costs. And the district staff apparently has been developing this idea, and they certainly have more details. But it does, from an outside independent consultant point of view, this does look like a good idea. This map it's a Google image of the map, and you can see where if you look on the south part of this map, you can see the old City Honors High School campus. So it's removed off the campus, but it's connected. So that could be a good opportunity for to pick up some savings by moving it there, because it's usually those continuation high schools, you want some separation from the high school. But this looks to be enough separation, and then possibly could be some shared administration that could help pick up some efficiency, and then even with just there's other types of efficiency that can be picked up by just having the campus close by. So that's another recommendation we have, is to go ahead and recommend moving that campus and consolidating. So in terms of next steps, what we're recommending is that this committee consider making a recommendation to the county administrator and to the board to, first close Warren Lane Elementary School, and then second, move Englewood Continuation High School to the Englewood High School campus, move the continuation school to the high school campus. And this should be done in fiscal year 22-23, school year 22-23, and which is next year. And so I think there's enough evidence that would be something we would recommend. And then the next year we would, and these, the recommendations going forward don't need to be recommended to the county administrator soon. This first one does. If the district is going to pick up some savings and some efficiency, it would need to make that recommendation very soon. But the demography report, recommended up to 5 schools, and we don't argue with that. And we talked about the second one, Worthington. We think it would be good to wait a year, and then what you can do is, in the fall, you can look at enrollment and see how that is looking and confirm that it ended up, the enrollment for the district looks like the demographer thinks it is. The one thing that remember about a projection is, as thorough as Davis demographics is with their projections, they're just projections, and you don't really know till you'll see the whites of the eyes of the students who's there. So it's, you know, anytime you can wait just a little bit to confirm is a good thing. And this isn't much of a wait, but you know, if you wait till the fall and things look like the enrollment projections look like they're pretty solid, then the recommendation would be that this committee make a recommendation to close Worthington for the 23-24 year. And then for the North and West region, we agree that we think there's some closures, consolidation that should take place, but it needs more study. We didn't feel comfortable at this point in time making a recommendation other than that the district should be closing some schools in those regions. So that would give some time for staff to take another look at this, look at configuration options, you know, look at some other variables that may be important, and then come back with a recommendation for those region schools. At this point in time, we're just not ready to really start naming names for schools that we're not really sure are 100% the right candidate. And then in the year 24-25, depending on what you find out in the North region, there would be additional schools to close for that year, depending on what you find out next year, and depending on the demographics, like we mentioned, to make sure it comes in like the demographers thinking. Actual enrollment will affect the recommended number of school closures, and then we've talked about that. And then the district review possibility reconfiguring. I mentioned that too, because the reconfiguring will play into, you know, any type of closures going forward. So that is my presentation. And at this point, I would be glad to take questions or help facilitating discussions that you feel are necessary.
Yeah, Doctor, I have a question. Great presentation, by the way. So the recommendation is to close Warren Lane 2022, 2023, and Worthington, right? By closing these schools, you said because of low enrollment, if I'm correct? How can we guarantee that by closing these schools that the enrollment still will not go down? And then what's the solution to why is there low enrollment? What is the solution for that, sir?
Yeah, those are really good questions. And I think it's you know, when you come to some of these things with schools, the best you can do is take, you know, your best well-educated guesses based on the data that you have. So you know, when you take a look at like the Warren Lane School, it's you know, it's very, very low enrollment on it, and you know, there's likely not going to be any change with that. Very likely that it's not going to double in size by next year. You know, the next point about, well, could students choose to go somewhere else to some other district? That's of course always a possibility, because when you close that school, they're going to choose some other school, and you hope it's your school, but it may not be. But even that being said, that, you know, a school of that size is so inefficient to run. It's very likely you'll pick up cost savings, even if all the students don't decide to return to your district. In terms of the you know, in terms of your next question, you know, first off, this isn't an Inglewood problem. This is a state of California problem. There's very few districts in the state that are having steady or growing enrollment. Everyone is shedding. Not everyone. Almost everyone is shedding kids. So there's a you know, the low birth rate in the whole state is a problem. California is an expensive state to live in. Families are moving out. So I think that's exacerbating the problem. So that's not something Englewood or any of the school districts can really fix short term. I think, you know, from talking to staff, I think they're really on top of it, trying to make the academic offerings as robust and attractive as possible, which, you know, can be better done if you can be more efficient. So you know, I think that's the right track to go. But it seems unlikely to be able to do that and keep all these elementary schools, you know, kind of as is. I hope that answered your question, at least partially.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I just wanted to make a quick clarification. Mr. Newman, I think your question was, is the recommendation for Warren Lane and Worthington in 22-23. The 22-23 recommendations are Warren Lane and potentially consolidating the Inglewood Continuation High School and to the Inglewood High School campus. So I just wanted to make that clarifying point. I don't know, hopefully it's clear from this slide what the recommended next steps are, but just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and just for clarity, that was Mr. Dexter Hall that asked that question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. However, I did have a couple of questions, and thank you, sir, for the presentation. You actually answered the first question I had was with regard to the savings.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I had my hand up and I had a question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, my question was, in the beginning of the slides, La Tierra was left out. I'm just trying to figure out who made that decision not to study or not to include La Tierra in that.
Yeah, I think, and we're of course using pre-existing data. And I think what it was is La Tierra doesn't have boundaries. And what the demographer was focusing on was what is the students within the boundaries of particular schools, what is the projection for that enrollment, and that school doesn't have boundaries. So from my understanding of looking at the data, I wasn't we didn't really feel like we could include that in there, but we do, the demographer is here, so if it is and he may be able to answer that question better than I can.
Yeah, just to answer your question. So when we looked at the boundaries and how many kids are living within those boundaries, we looked at all the kids attending IUSD schools, regardless of whether they're attending that boundary school or not. So kids living in, for example, Franklin Parent could be attending Franklin Parent or La Tierra or any other school. So those kids in those boundaries were accounted for, just to clarify, just for clarification's sake.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question in regards to moving Inglewood Continuation to Inglewood High School. I'm just trying to figure out how that recommendation saves money, because at the end of the day, that's what is trying to happen here, right? To save money. How does that save money, putting one high school, in the bounds of another one? Are you talking about cutting out a principal? Is that how it's going to save money? Or like, I just really want to understand that.
I can answer that question. Thank you. That's a very, very important question. So one of the things that when you look at school closure consolidation and as well as facilities, well, you look at several elements, right? You look at enrollment, you look at facilities and things of that nature. Well, when we look at our facilities, we also try to maximize how we're using our facilities, right? So, for instance, we have right now, as you can see in this map here, the south side there, those buildings there are all in operable. They're in conditions where we have to do a couple of different things here and there, but where they're usable. They're in a condition that we could use those buildings, and essentially the space is there. And so, in the sense of facilities wise, it makes sense because then we could just opt to modernize that a little bit. And then that opens up what we could do with, for example, Coleman Field, right? Which is where right now the continuation is. And it allows us to then look at, well, how can we, what can we do with Coleman Field as well to look at modernizing some of that. And it helps kind of in that conversation. It also helps in the sense of, because it's all in one area, it helps with administrative costs that potentially we could save in the sense of now it's all under one general area, and it's not like separated by right now as it is. So the good thing about that though is that it's already that section is already separated but in the same kind of plot of land, right? So it helps in that aspect that it's accessible to a administrative person would be able to easily access that area. But it's also separated from the campus, right? And so in regarding modernization, Inglewood High School is going to be going extensive modernization here. That's one of the hopes and goals of the facilities master plan. Inglewood High School is going to be a very important an integral part of modernization. So given that it's there, it also allows us to kind of modernize that area too. So in a lot of ways, it just helps us to consolidate. That's the consolidation portion of it too, to have them all kind of in a single area, but at the same time maximize other areas of land that we have in the district. So it's an administrative savings as well as a facility savings in the long run.
Okay, so you're saying you will eliminate a principal then?
Essentially, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Thompson.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your presentation and the information. And I'm just going to piggyback, and I don't know who was just speaking because I'm trying to drive home, but, and she just made a point. So you're going to eliminate a principal. I've been on the old City Honors campus. It is technically on Inglewood's campus, technically on their property, but it is a separate entity. And from what I remember, it was, you didn't have direct access from Inglewood High School. You had to walk down the street and out the parking lot to get to City Honors, supposedly. And so then you're trying to save money. By consolidating that or putting that on Inglewood's property. But so you're going to have one principal. How is that going to work? Because where City Honors, the old City Honors is, it's really a distance, and you kind of have to go out and in and around. So I don't know that you would be saving money as far as an administrator goes. And that's a lot to do, to have classrooms that really aren't accessible to the main body of a school. Just putting it out there.
No, thank you for that. And again, that has something that we've also considered, how to facilitate access for that principal into that area of the campus. The way it's right now, it's completely like separated by fencing. Essentially, what we would have to do is be able to open up a pathway so that they don't have to go across this to go outside the campus and go through Kelso. They would be able to go through the principal, right? Would be able to go through that area inside the Inglewood campus, and that person would have access to that section of where it is. So it's it is accessible from the high school, but like you said, in the past they had to go like all the way around. In this case, we'd have to do, and that's what I was talking about earlier. There is some things that we would have to do initially in regards to the building itself, make sure that we do any sort of maintenance it might need, and also pathways so that it's accessible.
Okay, and that will be part, and then because they would be moving, quote unquote, to Inglewood's campus, would they be part of the modernization efforts?
The continuation high school?
Yes.
Yes, that would be part of the efforts as well. Then that's why it would be a little bit better for us, because then we can kind of do a lot of that together with Inglewood High School. And then that opens up as well what you could do at Coleman Field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Selby.
Okay, my question is regarding the size of class per grade, and what was the study based upon? I know you said 1,020 students was one of the larger schools, but how many students is that per class?
Yes. So are you asking? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Excuse me. For each grade level, how was the study? Let me see if I can arrange that. You did the study on the capacity that the school could hold. So for each grade level, how many students was counted per class?
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So the districts have staffing ratios that they generally staff their schools with. Typically like K3 is 24-1 or less, unless they're in the collective bargaining agreement. There's an exception for that. So generally when they're looking at capacity, and that's the engineering firm or the architectural firm that actually determines that capacity. They're looking at the classrooms and they'll come up with a number that's a reasonable amount for each classroom, and then they'll do the math and come up with that larger amount. And that being said, from that study, there's some of these schools are almost double the capacity. So even if it's a little bit off, there should be plenty of space to house extra students. And I guess the other thing too is as some of these students are dispersed from one school to others, the combination classes are likely to diminish. Not only at the school that's being closed, but at the other schools. If the enrollment increases there, there'd be less of a need for combo classes at those school sites as well. So that's another benefit. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So I have another question regarding, and I don't know if this is the right form or whatever. So in our consideration for consolidation, I did ask in the last meeting about the academics portion of that and how that is not considered at all. And the capacity you're basing the capacity on the size of the class versus the teacher, how many students a teacher can teach.
If I may, Ms. Selby, that's your point of the academic impact is really important. We heard you at the last meeting, and so we do have a meeting following this one that will go into academics and how that would happen in transitioning students. The one thing I can tell you is that for class sizes, we do have, for example, for all of our TK to 3 students, we have a ratio, for instance, of every class being at the average of 28-1. Which is what we staff at, per our bargaining unit agreement. So we would continue to honor the bargaining unit agreement as we're supposed to. So the staffing in the classrooms would essentially we would ensure that they maintain with what the bargaining agreement says, so that we don't so that stays consistent. But in regards to the impact of how that all plays out. We do have a presentation following this one that will talk a little bit about education as well as.
Okay.
But thank you. That's a very important question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Selby. I had a couple of questions. One was why the staggered approach for Worthington, and why not it be included in the 22-23 recommendation. I think Joe, you spoke a little bit to that.
Yeah. Well, I think, certainly these are recommendations. The committee is going to decide what they're comfortable with. The closing of a school is a pretty major event. It is a major event for a school district. Mm-hmm. And so to close 2 in 1 year it can be done. But it's a lot for the district to take on, and by doing it this way, it buys you a little more time to make sure that the projections are accurate, and it's just 1 year. And we are, the truth is too, we're also in January, so we're pretty late in the year to start too many changes. So I think that was our logic. And that being said, if the committee could decide to move that up and bump it up to 22-23 if it wanted to.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Let me see the other one. It's good to hear about the funds that could be saved from closures could be reallocated to some of the other campuses. That was good to hear. And to Ms. Davenport's point about La Tijera, I wasn't aware that was considered a charter school. And I guess it would raise some questions about why it wasn't included in the demographic study, a demographer study. But
yeah, and let me just, since that came up, let me clarify to make sure I didn't mislead anybody. But the study in terms of the district study, it was looking that the demographer looked at all the students based on their residential boundaries for their home school, but since La Tierra doesn't have boundaries, they're in other schools' boundaries. So it's kind of a fairly nuanced thing. But because the focus of that study was the students living within a boundary, a charter school with no boundaries couldn't be projected regionally, or excuse me, by school site, because there's no boundaries for that school. But they were projected in the whole. If you look at the whole report that I believe, that has the district down hundreds of students, they are included in that, but because they're dispersed in all these other district school boundaries, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. It does. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Thompson, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Maybe I'm just confused because I thought maybe a year ago or so that you're talking about boundaries. So I just want just to be clear, I thought that we opened our boundaries for all schools. So you're saying La T doesn't have any boundaries, but technically none of our schools should have boundaries because they open Inglewood and the schools to anybody wherever you live, you could pick the school you want to go to. Am I correct?
Yeah, if I could just add, yeah, that's absolutely correct. As from my understanding, the district has an open enrollment policy, but that when the demographer did his work, he still had to assign students to an area because that's how they break up their studies. So even though the student theoretically could go anywhere, they still have a home school that they're assigned to, that they may not be attending, but they're assigned to that school boundary.
And in addition, it's important to note, right, that La Tijera is also a dependent charter school, as well as the other dependent charter school we have is City Honors High School, right? So both of those are dependent charter schools. So they're treated a little bit differently, right? Because of even fiscally, they're treated a little bit differently because they're a dependent charter. So certain things you have to look at in regards to their charter and everything like that. So that's why it also kind of plays a little bit of a different role when they're looking at the data.
Thank you for your clarification.
Okay, Mr. Guzman, and thank you, Mr. Joe, for your presentation. Would you like to introduce the next presenter, please?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Newman. And again, one of the questions that was addressed last time, and you heard it here today as well, is in regards to the impacts to academics. How is that going to play with the school closure? How is that going to play an impact on education for our students? And we are thankful that we have our Chief Academic Officer here today, Dr. Bernadette Lucas, as well as our Chief Human Resources Officer here, Dr. Nick Stephanie. So we're really excited to have both of them here. And they are going to be presenting on the item of school closures, the impact of education there. So you may begin, Dr. Lucas. Thank you. If you could project Daisy, if you could project the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. Thank you, Daisy.
Give me 1 second. Oh, sure. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Bernadette Lucas. I am the Chief Academic Officer for Inglewood Unified School District. Joining me today, as Mr. Guzman shared, is Dr. Nick Stephanie. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Nick Stephanie, I'm the Interim Chief Human Resources Officer. I've been in Inglewood for about 4 or 5 months now.
So I'm ready for the next slide. As Mr. Guzman shared, he did front load us with questions that the committee posed, I think, your last session. So today we'll cover the impact of any closures and or consolidations on the instructional program. Dr. Stephanie will talk about the HR part of this, and of course, we'll be answering any questions that you might have. I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. So in regard to any possible closures or consolidations, without reading the slide to you, we would, of course, engage in an analysis of the school programming of any schools proposed for closure. What does that mean? All of our schools have some sort of theme or foci to different degrees. So if a school had a particular theme, or other instructional programming that seemed or was unique to it, we would analyze that so that we could figure out if we can move that programming to another school. Many of our schools in the district share the same themes, programming, or foci. So what is very important to note is that parents would be able, back to the open enrollment point, be able to enroll their child or children in any IUSD school, which is very, very important. Parents would be able to receive information on and research the instructional programs at the schools to choose the school that meets the needs of their child or children. And then lastly, the district would hold open houses and fairs for any parents who were whose children are enrolled in schools that are being closed or consolidated. That way, they would have hopefully easy access to schools to ask questions, to hear about the programming, so they themselves wouldn't have to, go to each school and figure this out. So those are some of the strategies we would leverage to support parents in the event of a school closure or consolidation. I'd like to now turn it over to Dr. Stephanie.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas. Next slide, please. So in the event of a school closure, we would be reducing the number of teaching positions and classified positions at that school. When we reduce the number of positions, anytime we reduce the number of positions in the district, whether it's due to enrollment, whether it's due to lack of work, lack of funds, whatever the reason, we take into account district-wide seniority. And so a reduction of teaching positions would basically create a situation in which the teachers at that school, where their positions are reduced or where their positions are eliminated, they would bump the least senior teachers in the district, or less senior teachers in the district. Okay, or possibly, and this is the ideal case, if we have open positions. So if we have vacancies, or if we have teachers that retire, or if we have teachers that move on to other districts, we can place those teachers into those open positions through what's called the displacement process. Okay, we try to give teachers as much choice as possible in that process. However, as to where they're placed. However, when we actually do have to go through layoffs and we actually do have to, take away people's jobs or lay folks off, that goes in the order of reverse seniority. It's done by credential. Okay, so multiple subject credentials, they're all in one list. Then all the math teachers, all the teachers in the district that could teach math, they're on another list. So you have to lay off folks in order of reverse seniority by credential. The most senior person bumps the least senior person. The next most senior person bumps the next least senior person. It kind of goes in that order. Districts go through this, in cycles. Usually when the state budget is better, we don't have layoffs. And when the state budget gets worse, obviously we have layoffs. So if that comes up, or if positions are eliminated, we will do that analysis. And we need to notice these teachers that they would either be RIFed or displaced in the springtime. And then we would start making plans for the following school year. Thank you.
So I'm sure I speak for Dr. Stephanie. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We're available for any questions you might have.
Yes, I have a question. So if the teacher is laid off, is there a type of severance pay package that they have in place?
No, there's not necessarily a severance package in education. That doesn't really exist in public education. The one good thing is in public education, though, is if anybody is laid off, they do have return rights for the next 39 months. So if there is an open position, they would have rights to that position that they're qualified for and that they're credentialed for. They would have rights to that position for 39 months, about three years and a little bit.
Yes, sir. So if they reapply to that position, my understanding, would they get priority in the application process?
That's correct. Actually, they wouldn't even have to apply. We would have to offer them that position first.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And one thing, that we should point out too is in the event like of a school closure, right? If those students, let's say, go to another site, right? They're dispersed to different sites and all that. Then essentially, there could be theoretical situations, right, where now enrollment increased at the other site, so now we'll need a teacher at that site, right? And so then that's where like all of this other reassignments happen as well. I don't know, Dr. Stephanie, if you could talk a little bit about how that would work out.
Yeah, definitely. Like Mr. Guzman said, if students transfer from one site to another, if 30 kids go from one site to another site, that's going to be a teacher that goes with them. So we might have more of a shift of classified and certificated staff members. But sometimes what happens is that, let's say a class is a 30, a classroom is capped at 30 kids. Sometimes we'll have 27 kids there. We're able to absorb that without hiring another teacher. We have to be efficient with our staffing. That's a goal of the district. But at the same time, it is very plausible that you'll see a decrease at the schools that are at the school or schools that are closed. You'll see a decrease of positions there, and you'll see an increase of positions at the schools where those students wind up. We don't know what that's going to look like until we see what the enrollment looks like. Any other questions?
Yes, I don't know if this. I have a comment. A lot of times in Inglewood, we have events, and they're very nice, but somehow it doesn't really get out to the community. So I was just concerned that if we do have school closures, and there is an enrollment fair, could we possibly think about utilizing some of our partners in Inglewood, the city of Inglewood, like City Hall, and maybe advertise on those big mega billboards they have all over Inglewood or something of that nature, so that can get out further to the community? That's just a comment.
Ms. Thompson, that's an excellent recommendation, and we would work with student services to do just that. Thank you very much. It's an excellent point.
And also recommend
I'm sorry. Thank you. I was muted. I thought I was saying thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Hey, Arvin, that was a good question. Also recommend not only the City Hall, but also recommend reach out to the Inglewood Chamber of Commerce, which I'm on the board of directors, working with that entity too as well. Great question, Arvin.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Mr. Stephanie or Mrs. Lucas? If not, we'll move on. Thank you both for your presentations. Very enlightening. Really appreciated it.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. So moving on to item 7, comments from the advisory committee. Does the committee have any comments that you would like to provide? If you do, please raise your hand so that your name can be called.
Actually, I think we were moving on to, this is Serena Abrahamian. I think we're moving on to number 6, the discussion regarding recommendations for closure and consolidation.
Oh, that's right. That's right. We did shift some things around.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So number 6, initial discussions regarding recommendations for closures/consolidations. I'm going to defer to Mr. Rafael Guzman to lead on this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. I really appreciate just the committee's expertise here and just the questions that they've asked. They're all excellent observations. I think they really help in the discussion. So some of the items that we'd like to see as far as next steps really is going towards a recommendation. Today we heard a presentation from Total School Solutions, which utilized the information provided by Davis Demographics as well as Little Diversified as well. And essentially they presented some specific recommendations now regarding specific schools that we could now, that the committee could now discuss and see if they're comfortable with making a recommendation. We've also asked our Chief Academic Officer and our Chief Human Resources Officer as well to talk a little bit about the impacts of staffing and the impacts of education. And we've heard some of their presentations. So at this point, kind of the next steps would really be to hear out from the committee. Is there anything else the committee would like to hear or discuss so that hopefully at the next meeting, we can agendize an actual recommendation. And so that would be the hope that we could look at a future meeting very soon, where we could then identify a actual recommendation and have that just as an action item. Currently, we have here a discussion, right, regarding the recommendation. So if the committee feels comfortable, right, for the next meeting saying, okay, we'd like to discuss now an actual action item, we could do that. And that's kind of the typical process. I don't know, Ms. Ibrahimian, if you had something else to mention regarding how that would work.
No, I think you covered it, Mr. Guzman, but ideally, yes. So we would have further discussions today regarding what additional information, if any, the committee would like to review. And then hopefully, as Mr. Guzman said, at the next meeting, we could agendize an action item for making the recommendations as either as presented by Total School Solutions, or if adjustments are made or the committee deems should be made to those recommendations, then of course we're open to that as well.
Okay, so I'd like to open it up then to any for you all to have that discussion or just hear out if there's anything else that the committee would like to hear or see.
I have just a quick question. Great presentations overall. Great job, Mr. Chairman, for chairing this committee. But I want to recollect, has we based this on like other districts? What's like, for example, LA's USD, Long Beach School District, have they done kind of adopted similar measures for school closures?
Yeah, so we actually went and looked at the recommendations from CDE. There's an actual manual, right, that discusses the best practices for closures directly from the California Department of Education. And that's kind of how the committee was formed, right? We looked at some of the recommended structures of a committee and how that all should be carried out. Ms. Ibrahimian, I don't know if you want to clarify some of that as well.
Just so I can understand the question better, Mr. Hall, is there anything specific that you're inquiring about? More the process, this committee information?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry to interrupt you, ma'am. Yeah, so Mr. Guzman pretty much answered my question. I just want to see that you looked at other best practices, like, for example, LAUSD, Long Beach Unified School District, for examples.
Absolutely. And as Mr. Guzman said, the CDE does have a pretty detailed recommendation of how to move through this process. And of course, you're all welcome, and we can provide the link to go and view that on the CDE's website. I think it was in one of our initial presentations on the role and responsibilities of the committee. But in addition, of course, each district can set its own just general procedure for moving through this. Not every school district forms committees. This is actually, I think, a very transparent and streamlined way to move through the process, because then not only is the committee receiving all the information, but on a parallel track, because these are Brown Act meetings, it's transparent to the public as well, as the public can attend these meetings. So as we've been having these discussions and you've been expressing certain things and asking for more information, the public has an opportunity to follow along with all of that and understand how some of this is being presented. But then in addition, of course, there are further steps. Once the committee makes the recommendation, then Dr. Torres still has to take action to close the school. And so those are procedural steps that would occur after the committee's recommendations are presented to Dr. Torres and to the board.
And also, just like to also, it's important to add this to the equation here. This is also a recommendation from FICMAT as well, from the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team, that specifically in AB 1840, that the district should be looking at this. And so that's also part of that decision matrix, right? Is essentially, these are also recommendations that FICMAT has recommended for us to look at as a district. And as Ms. Ibrahimian said, we looked at just the best methods of doing that.
And to be as transparent as possible with the public, with the committee, and with everybody, just in terms of providing the information that's necessary in order to make a really important recommendation.
I would like to ask just whoever knows, maybe you can tell us next time, for these recommended closures, what is the distance to the next elementary school? Let's say Warren Lane to the two schools are recommended. What are the distances? Because that may make a difference in how a parent views that.
Yes, we could bring some of that information as regards to distance and what the district would do in the event that, let's say, parents start to say, the distance is a little too far. I think that in the map that Dr. Pandolfo showed earlier, it showed kind of like the location of Warren Lane and where it's at. But we could get some more info on that.
Thank you.
So, any additional questions for in regards to the closure or information? With that, then I think that it would be important to consider at this next meeting actually making the recommendation, right? Agendizing it and saying, okay, look, we'd like to take this based on the assessments that we saw through, for example, Total School Solution, Davis Demographics. This is the recommendation that we'd like to make to the county administrator as well as the Board of Education.
Yeah, I was going to kind of dive into that a little bit on item 7, Mr. Guzman. I think I had an ideal about that. If you wouldn't mind, are you okay with us moving on to item 7, and we can kind of pick that up in that?
Okay, sure.
Item. Okay. So comments from the advisory committee members. Does the committee have any comments that you would like to provide? If you do, please raise your hand so that your name can be called. Just to make sure that we're following the process. So I'll raise my hand. So with regard to the recommendations, and the presentations were great. It gave us really, really good information that we could digest. I wanted to ask, is there an opportunity for just the committee to meet and kind of go over the presentation that Joe provided? So just so that we could sync up and align our thoughts, come back to you guys in the next meeting and say, here's where we are with the recommendations. I think from a committee standpoint, this format is, it's fine to just share information and stuff, but if you're asking the committee to make a recommendation, it's probably better for that committee to kind of meet and show some cohesion on what the recommendations are that they want to present. So is that outside of, am I outside of the bounds of how these meetings are supposed to work? Asking that, or?
I would like to have our legal counsel, Ms. Ibrahimian, if she could talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Newman. I think the idea of it is great. Of course, you should have the opportunity to talk through the information and ask questions. And I think we've provided that form, even in this format. I think you've had an opportunity to, as presentations are made, ask questions. Unfortunately, our hands are a little bit tied with regard to your request because these meetings, this is a board-appointed committee, or in this case, a county administrator-appointed committee. And so all of it is structured under the Brown Act requirements, and under the Brown Act, all of the meetings have to be conducted in public and have to be structured in the way that we've structured these meetings, right? With an agenda where the public can attend and you move through the items, only items that are on the agenda can be discussed. So if the request is, if you want to have more of a discussion item on the next meeting agenda and then move to voting on the recommendation, that's absolutely possible. But for the committee to do it behind closed doors or just with each other is not legal. We can't support, that because this is a public forum. It has to be conducted under the Brown Act requirements.
Okay. Is it possible to share that presentation that Joe did with the committee?
I believe it's already on the.
It's on the site.
Daisy, is it already on the website?
I post the presentations right after they're finalized, so I got them today. I'm gonna post them later or tomorrow.
Okay, so at the latest by tomorrow, Mr. Newman, they'll be on the website.
Okay, perfect. All right. So that answers my one question. Are there any other questions out there from the committee? No? Okay, so we'll move on to item number 8, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I motion.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion from Mr. Hall and second by Mr. Perez. Ms. Torres, would you please take a vote?
Yes. Ms. Tiara Johnson? Ms. Tamara Thompson?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Vanessa Davenport? Mr. Miguel Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Dexter Hall?
Yes.
Ms. Sylvia Latson Selby?
Yes.
Mr. Wesley Newman?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Daisy. So on the motion made by Mr. Hall and second by Ms. Perez, the vote carries and is approved to adjourn this meeting at 5:17 p.m. Thank you all for joining this evening. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.